The grand hall of the Zyrian Empire shone with the light of 1,000 floating crystals. The air shimmered with energy, and the scent of rare starflowers filled the space. Nobles from every corner of the galaxy had gathered, their elegant robes flowing like liquid metal. Today was an important day. Princess Valara would choose her future husband. Valara sat on the throne of starlight, her silver-blue skin glowing under the soft luminescence of the crystals above. Her long violet hair cascaded over her shoulders like a river of light, and her piercing indigo eyes surveyed the room with authority. She was no ordinary princess. She was strong-willed, intelligent, and the future ruler of the empire. The High Chancellor, an elderly Zyrian with golden markings on his forehead, stepped forward and raised his staff. The hall fell silent. "Princess Valara, it is time to announce your choice," the Chancellor said, his voice echoing through the chamber. Valara stood, her regal presence commanding attention. She looked at the suitors gathered before her, warriors, nobles, and leaders from different alien worlds. Some had scales, others had shimmering wings, and a few had glowing, gemstone-like skin. But among them stood one figure that made her blood boil, a human. Captain Orion Drake stood near the back, arms crossed over his chest. He wore a sleek, dark uniform with silver accents, the emblem of the Terran fleet displayed on his shoulder. His emerald green eyes watched everything with quiet confidence, and a faint scar traced the edge of his jawline, a mark of past battles. Unlike the other suitors, he was not here to seek her hand. He had come as an ambassador. Valara's gaze hardened as she spoke. "I will marry anyone but the human." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Chancellor's face tensed, and the gathered nobles whispered among themselves. It was no secret that many Zyrians looked down on humans, believing them to be a lesser race, too young and unpredictable to be taken seriously. But never before had a royal declared such a bold rejection so publicly. Orion raised an eyebrow, a smirk forming at the corner of his lips. He had seen arrogance before, but this was something else. Still, he remained silent, letting the drama unfold. The Calorian warlord, a towering reptilian being with obsidian-black scales, stepped forward. "An excellent choice, Princess," he said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Humans are weak. Their time in the stars has been short. They do not belong among true rulers." Others nodded in agreement, but not all. Some of the council members exchanged uncertain glances, knowing that humans were not to be underestimated. The Chancellor hesitated before speaking again. "Princess, the Council has advised that all potential alliances be considered, including those with humanity. The Terran fleet is growing in strength, and their technological advancements." "I have made my decision," Valara interrupted. "The Zyrian Empire will never be tied to humans through marriage." Orion chuckled softly, drawing attention. The sound was not mocking, but amused. He stepped forward, ignoring the disapproving stares from the nobles. "Well, Princess, that's quite the welcome," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Not that I came here looking for a wife. I'm just here to ensure a fair alliance between our people. But if you're so afraid of humans, maybe we're stronger than you think." A hush fell over the hall. Afraid. The word echoed in Valara's mind like a challenge. Her hands clenched at her sides. She was not afraid of humans. She simply saw them as unworthy. The Chancellor cleared his throat, trying to calm the rising tension. Perhaps it would be wise to let the trials decide. The princess must choose a suitor through the ancient tests of strength, intelligence, and leadership. A murmur of agreement swept through the nobles. Valara lifted her chin. The trials had always been the way of the Empire. It was a fair method, one that would surely prove her right. But before she could speak, a voice rang out from the crowd. "If the human is truly unworthy, the Zelthar prince, a rival suitor with dark crimson skin and glowing amber eyes, sneered, then let him prove it." He turned to Orion, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Unless, of course, he's too afraid to compete." Orion met the prince's gaze without hesitation. afraid of a few royal games. His smirk deepened. I'll take my chances. Valara's eyes narrowed. She had no intention of allowing the human to win. The trials would prove once and for all that Orion Drake was not worthy of standing beside her. Or so she thought. The trial arena was a colossal structure carved from luminous starstone, its walls pulsing with ancient energy. Towering spires stretched toward the heavens, their tips crackling with blue lightning. Thousands of Zirian spectators filled the stands, their glowing eyes fixed on the platform where the suitors stood. Princess Valara arrived in a flowing silver robe, her violet hair braided with strands of starlight. Her indigo eyes swept over the gathered contestants. There were warriors, scholars, and leaders from across the galaxy, all powerful in their own right. And then there was Orion Drake, standing with his hands in his pockets, as if he had nothing to prove. Valara's jaw tightened. She would enjoy watching him fail. The High Chancellor raised his staff. The first trial shall begin. The test of strength will determine who among you is truly worthy of standing beside the princess. Each challenger must defeat a simulated adversary designed to match their skill. A shimmering battle ring materialized at the center of the arena. Inside, a towering Zalgor beast took shape, a monstrous creature with obsidian black skin, 6 razor-sharp claws, and molten eyes that burned like twin suns. The beast let out a deafening roar, shaking the very air. The crowd cheered as the first contestant, the Xalorian warlord, stepped forward. His black scales gleamed under the artificial light. He flexed his claws, eyes glowing with anticipation. The trial began. The warlord moved like a shadow, dodging the beast's strikes and countering with his own lethal attacks. His claws slashed against the creature's hide, sending sparks flying. After a tense battle, he delivered a final crushing blow, and the beast collapsed into a cloud of light. The crowd erupted in approval. One by one, the contestants faced the trial. Some succeeded, their strength earning nods of approval. Others were struck down, failing to endure the beast's relentless assault. Finally, it was Orion's turn. Valara folded her arms. This should be interesting. Orion stepped onto the platform, rolling his shoulders. Unlike the others, he carried no weapons, no armor, just a standard Terran fleet uniform, and his usual infuriating smirk. The Zalgor beast materialized once more, its molten eyes locking onto its new target. It lunged with terrifying speed, claws swiping toward Orion's chest. The audience gasped, but Orion didn't dodge. At the last possible moment, he sidestepped, his movement so precise it was almost effortless. The beast's claws sliced through empty air. Orion's hand shot forward, landing a single, well-placed strike to its throat. The creature stumbled. Valara's eyes widened. That wasn't luck. That was skill. The beast roared in frustration, swinging again. Orion ducked, weaving through its attacks like a shadow. Every move he made was calculated, efficient. He wasn't overpowering the creature. He was outthinking it. With one final motion, Orion leaped onto the beast's back, gripping its thick hide. Before it could throw him off, he delivered a precise, electrified pulse from a hidden device on his wrist, directly into the creature's nerve center. The beast convulsed, let out a choked growl, and collapsed. Silence fell over the arena. Then the crowd erupted. Even some of the Zirian nobles, who had scoffed at Orion's presence, now murmured in astonishment. A human had bested the trial not with brute strength, but with sheer intelligence and speed. Valara's nails dug into her palms. She was not impressed. Not at all. The Zelthar prince, who had mocked Orion earlier, scowled. A cheap trick, he muttered. Orion dusted off his uniform, flashing the prince a grin. If you're upset, maybe try thinking next time. Valara stepped forward, her voice cool. You won this round, human. But the next trial will not be so kind. Orion met her gaze, his green eyes gleaming. Looking forward to it, princess. And for the first time, Valara wasn't sure who would win. The great celestial hall shimmered under the glow of floating crystal orbs. Towering spires of pure light stretched high above, casting shifting patterns on the trial chamber's silver floors. The atmosphere was heavy with tension as the remaining contenders stood in a semicircle before a grand, circular table of illusions. Princess Valara sat on her elevated throne, her violet hair woven into a crown of intricate braids. Her indigo eyes scanned the remaining suitors. After the trial of strength, several warriors had been eliminated. But to her great frustration, Orion Drake was still standing, calm, relaxed, and as annoyingly confident as ever. She tightened her grip on the armrest of her throne. This next challenge would be different. He would fail here. He had to. The High Chancellor stepped forward, his deep voice echoing across the hall. The second trial is one of wits. Each contestant will be placed inside the mind labyrinth, a living puzzle designed to test intellect, adaptability, and problem-solving skills. There is only one way out, but only those who possess true cunning will find it. Fail, and you will be trapped inside until time runs out. Murmurs rippled through the audience. A flick of the High Chancellor's staff activated the table, and 5 glowing portals emerged, each leading to a different illusionary realm. The first suitor, the Zelthar prince, stepped forward, his scaled golden armor gleaming. I shall enter first, he declared, striding confidently into his portal. One by one, the remaining suitors followed, each vanishing into their respective trials. Finally, it was Orion's turn. You should reconsider, Valara said, her tone laced with challenge. The mind labyrinth has defeated even the greatest strategists of our kind. A mere human stands no chance. Orion smirked. Well, lucky for me, I never was a strategist. Just a guy who hates being stuck in one place for too long. And with that, he stepped through the portal. Orion landed on solid ground, surrounded by shifting walls of liquid glass. Strange, mirrored corridors stretched endlessly in all directions, reflecting distorted versions of himself. The air hummed with an unseen energy, and ghostly whispers echoed from nowhere. A deep voice boomed overhead. Solve the riddle. Find the exit. Orion took a slow breath. Great. A talking maze. Just what I needed. A golden inscription appeared on the nearest wall. What begins and has no end, moves yet never rests, and is always ahead but never behind. Orion frowned. He had always been a man of instinct rather than riddles, but he wasn't stupid. The answer had to be something constant, unstoppable. Then it hit him. Time, he said. The walls shifted, opening a new pathway. One down, he muttered, stepping forward. But the maze wasn't done. Strange figures emerged from the mirrored walls, distorted reflections of himself, mimicking his every move. But there was something off about them. Their motions were delayed, their eyes hollow. A new inscription appeared. Only one may leave. Choose the real path. Orion clenched his jaw. This was a deception test. If he followed the wrong reflection, he'd be trapped in a loop. He studied the figures carefully. One of them blinked a second too late. Another one's movements were slightly delayed. But then, in the farthest mirror, he spotted himself, standing naturally, not mimicking anything. Orion grinned. You're the real path, aren't you? As soon as he spoke, the false reflections shattered, and the final door swung open. He stepped through and emerged back in the great hall. Gasps filled the air. He was the first to return. Valara sat in stunned silence. Even the Zelthar prince had not emerged yet. Orion dusted off his jacket and shot her a look. I thought this was supposed to be hard. For the first time, Valara wasn't just annoyed. She was intrigued. The human had won again. The great celestial hall buzzed with energy. Whispers filled the air as nobles and spectators exchanged stunned glances. The human had done the impossible. Again. Princess Valara sat frozen on her throne, her indigo eyes locked on Orion Drake, who stood with his usual smirk, arms crossed. He had not only passed the trial of strength, but had also outwitted the mind labyrinth, emerging first. This was not supposed to happen. No human had ever come this far. The other suitors had finally returned, each looking exhausted and embarrassed. Prince Zelthar, his golden scales dulled with frustration, clenched his fists. The Velmeri emissary, a tall being with luminous blue skin, avoided everyone's gaze. The High Chancellor tapped his staff, silencing the murmurs. "We move to the final trial," he announced. Valara's heart tightened. The trial of hearts. This was her last chance. She stood, her royal gown shimmering with celestial light, and raised her chin. "This trial is not one of strength or intelligence," she declared. "It is a test of character. Each suitor must prove their true nature through a single choice. The one who wins will be the one who holds the heart of the future queen." Orion's smirk finally faltered. "Wait, what?" The High Chancellor gestured, and the floor shifted beneath them. The entire hall transformed into an illusory realm, its edges shimmering like a waking dream. The suitors found themselves standing before 3 gigantic doors, each carved with strange symbols. "The test is simple," Valara continued. "Each door represents a path. Behind one is a great treasure, riches beyond imagination. Behind another is power, a throne of infinite rule. And behind the last is something else entirely." The suitors exchanged glances. "The choice is yours," the High Chancellor said. "But be warned, what you choose will reveal who you truly are." One by one, the suitors stepped forward. Prince Zelthar wasted no time. He strode toward the door of power, placing his scaled hand against it. "I was born to rule," he declared, stepping inside. The Velmeri emissary hesitated before choosing the door of treasure, whispering something about securing his people's future. One by one, the suitors made their choices. Only Orion remained. Valara watched him closely. She had seen men fight and scheme for wealth and status. She had seen warriors break bones and bleed for her hand. But Orion was different. He wasn't here for the reasons they were. She had expected him to take the treasure. Humans loved wealth, after all, or maybe power, since his kind always craved influence. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the doors with an unreadable expression. Seconds passed, then a minute. The audience whispered. The High Chancellor frowned. "Do you not wish to choose, human?" he finally asked. Orion let out a slow breath. Honestly, he glanced at Valara. "None of these interest me." Gasps filled the hall. The High Chancellor's eyes narrowed. "You must choose." Orion tilted his head. "You said this is a test of character, right?" He stepped away from the doors and crossed his arms. "Then my choice is this. I'm not choosing." Silence. Valara felt a strange pull in her chest. "Explain," the High Chancellor demanded. Orion sighed. "Look, I didn't come here for gold, and I don't care about a throne. I'm not interested in winning a kingdom through some test." He glanced at Valara again, this time with genuine curiosity. "I came here because I was challenged, because a certain princess said no human was worthy." The weight of his words settled over her like a storm cloud. She expected arrogance. She expected him to want something in return for coming this far. But he didn't. And for the first time since this trial began, Princess Valara felt something strange in her chest. A flicker of doubt. Because maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about him. The great celestial hall remained silent. No one had expected this outcome. Orion stood firm, arms crossed, his brown eyes locked onto Princess Valara's. The other suitors had chosen their paths, wealth, power, but he had refused to choose at all. High Chancellor Valtherin narrowed his silver eyes. "No one has ever declined the trial," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. Orion shrugged. "Then I guess I'm the first." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the nobles sneered, whispering that the human was arrogant, that he was disrespecting their traditions. But others, especially the younger ones, watched with curiosity. Valara clenched her hands at her sides. This human had already surprised her many times, but this was something different. She had designed the final trial carefully. It was a test to expose greed, ambition, or selflessness. Yet Orion's response didn't fit into any of those categories. He wasn't proving himself worthy through sacrifice. He simply didn't care about the rewards at all. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked, her voice measured. Orion raised a brow. "That I fail." The High Chancellor nodded. "You forfeit the right to compete for the princess's hand. Your journey ends here, human." There it was. The moment Valara had been waiting for. Orion would finally leave. She should have been relieved. But instead, something inside her twisted. She studied him, this man who had bested warriors, solved impossible riddles, and refused to kneel before anyone. A part of her had expected him to fight harder, to try and win her in some way. But he just sighed and stretched. "Well, it was fun while it lasted," he said casually. "Guess I'll be heading back to my ship." And just like that, he turned and walked toward the grand exit. The moment he moved, something inside Valara snapped. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Wait." Orion stopped. Slowly, he glanced back over his shoulder. The hall went completely still. Valara wasn't sure what she was doing. Her heart pounded as she spoke her next words. "You have proven something," she said carefully. The High Chancellor frowned. "Princess." Her gaze didn't waver. This trial was never just about choosing the right door. It was about revealing the suitor's true nature. She took a slow breath. "And Orion has revealed his." Orion turned fully now, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "And what's that?" She hesitated, but only for a second. "That you are not here for selfish reasons." Her voice was quieter now. "That maybe I misjudged you." Orion blinked. Then, to her absolute frustration, he smirked. "Are you saying you like me now, princess?" Heat rushed to her face. I didn't say that." She snapped, which only made him grin wider. The High Chancellor cleared his throat, clearly displeased. "Your Highness, are you implying that?" "I am saying," Valara interrupted, regaining her composure, "that Orion should not be dismissed as a mere failure. He has earned my respect." There was a sharp silence. Then, to everyone's shock, she took a step closer to him. "I declared I would marry anyone but a human," she said, her voice steady. "But perhaps I was too hasty in that declaration." Gasps filled the hall. Nobles exchanged stunned looks. Even the suitors who had passed the trial looked outraged. Orion, meanwhile, was watching her with an unreadable expression. For the first time since they met, Princess Valara was the one caught off guard. And deep down, she wasn't sure if she hated it, or if she wanted to see where this went. A heavy silence filled the celestial hall. Valera's words still hung in the air, shocking everyone. High Chancellor Valtheran's face was unreadable, but the tension in his posture showed his disapproval. The noble suitors, aliens of power and prestige, looked furious. The idea that a human could earn even a fraction of the princess's favor was unthinkable. Orion, on the other hand, simply folded his arms, looking at Valara with a raised eyebrow. "So, does this mean you're considering me now?" Valara clenched her jaw. "It means I may have judged you unfairly." His grin was maddening. "That's a start." The High Chancellor stepped forward, his silver robes glinting under the ethereal glow of the hall. "Your Highness, this is highly irregular," he said carefully. "You declared that a human would never be considered. The Council will not accept a reversal of such magnitude." The other nobles murmured in agreement. The weight of tradition pressed heavily in the room. But Valara lifted her chin. "Then let the Council come to me. I will remind them that I am the one who chooses." Valtheran's expression tightened. "You risk alienating the Empire's strongest allies. The suitors have completed their trials. That honorable path would be to—" "I know the laws better than anyone, Chancellor," Valara interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "And I have not chosen yet. Orion remains a contender." The murmuring rose to open protests. The nobles, especially the alien suitors, were outraged. "This is an insult," cried Lord Zivar, a noble from the ice world of Selphar. "We have proven ourselves, and yet you entertain this human's presence." Valara turned toward him, her golden eyes steady. "Tell me, Lord Zivar, did you enter the trials to win me, or to gain power over the Empire?" Zivar flinched. His hesitation spoke louder than words. Valara looked to the others. "And what about the rest of you? Would you still fight for my hand if I were not the princess?" Silence. Valara smiled slightly. "That is what I thought." The nobles fumed, but they could not argue. The trial had revealed who they truly were. Orion exhaled, shaking his head. "This is a lot of drama over a marriage," he muttered under his breath. Valara shot him a look. "The Empire's future is at stake." He smirked. "And here I thought it was about you finding a husband." Her lips pressed into a thin line. This human infuriated her, and yet, somehow, she found herself intrigued. Valtheran finally spoke again. "Then what is your next move, Your Highness?" Valara hesitated. She hadn't planned this far ahead. She had spent years believing humans were lesser, too weak, too simple, too unworthy. And yet, Orion had not bowed. He had not played the game like the others. She turned to him. "Would you stay?" Orion blinked. "What?" "Would you stay and continue the trials?" she asked, "knowing you still may not win?" His brown eyes studied her, searching for deception. Then he shrugged. "I was never here to win," he admitted. "I was here because someone told me I couldn't be." Valara's heart did something strange in her chest. She did not understand it, but she knew one thing. This human was not like the others. She turned back to the hall. "Then the trials continue." Gasps filled the room. Orion chuckled. "Guess I'm not leaving yet." And as she met his gaze, Valara realized she wasn't sure if she wanted him to leave anymore. Orion stood in the middle of the celestial hall, his arms crossed as he listened to the murmurs around him. The alien nobles were furious. The suitors looked at him like he was a mistake, something that didn't belong. And maybe, in their eyes, he didn't. But he wasn't going anywhere. Valara sat on her throne, her golden eyes unreadable. She had thrown the Empire into chaos by allowing a human to continue the trials. Now she had to prove she was not making a mistake. She rose from her seat. The next trial will be one that cannot be won with strength, power, or influence. It is a trial of the mind and soul. The trial of truth. A silence settled over the room. The nobles exchanged uncertain glances. Lord Zivar frowned. The trial of truth. That trial hasn't been used in centuries. Valera's gaze was steady. Perhaps it is time we bring it back. A group of royal scholars stepped forward, carrying an ancient-looking artifact, a crystal sphere that pulsed with a soft, silver light. It was placed on a pedestal in the center of the hall. The trial of truth reveals what lies within, Valera explained. It does not judge power. It does not measure intelligence. It shows the heart of the one who touches it. The suitors shifted uncomfortably. Orion, however, was intrigued. Valera gestured toward the sphere. Each of you will step forward and place your hand on it. The sphere will reveal your true nature to all present. If your intentions are selfish, if your heart is filled with greed, the light will turn dark. The suitors hesitated. Some of them knew they had come for power. Valera's gaze swept over them. Is there a problem? One by one, they stepped forward. Lord Zivar was first. He placed his hand on the sphere. The silver light flickered, then dimmed slightly. The nobles murmured. Zivar removed his hand quickly, his face blank. Another suitor stepped up, a noble from the fire-wielding Senderan race. He touched the sphere, and the light pulsed red for a moment before settling back into silver. Some suitors showed great ambition. Others revealed hidden doubts. Some hesitated before touching it at all. Finally, it was Orion's turn. He sighed, running a hand through his dark brown hair. All right, let's get this over with. He stepped forward and placed his palm on the sphere. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the silver light flared, bright, strong, unwavering. The nobles gasped. Valera's heart skipped a beat. The light was not dimmed. It did not flicker or shift in color. It simply shined. Pure, steady, honest. Orion raised an eyebrow. Huh, guess I'm not as bad as everyone thought. Valera stared at the sphere. She had expected something different, something that would prove he wasn't worthy. But instead, it had revealed what she refused to admit. This human was genuine. He had no secret hunger for power, no deception, no greed. He was here because he wanted to be. And for the first time, Valera saw Orion not as a human, not as an outsider, but as someone real. The nobles broke into arguments. Some claimed the test was flawed. Others refused to believe the results. Valera silenced them with a single look. The trial of truth has spoken. Valtheran's voice was tight. And what do you plan to do with this truth, Your Highness? Valera turned to Orion. His brown eyes met hers. She took a breath. I plan to see how this story ends. The celestial hall was in an uproar. The trial of truth had spoken, and the result was undeniable. Orion, the human, had a heart free of greed, ambition, or deception. Some nobles refused to accept it. Others whispered in shock. The suitors, once full of arrogance, now shifted uneasily, realizing they had been exposed. Orion simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting for the next storm to come. Valera rose from her throne, her golden eyes scanning the room. She could see the conflict brewing among her people. Some of them wanted to dismiss the results. Others respected the trial's verdict. And then there was Daltheran. He was silent, but his fists were clenched at his sides. His silver hair shimmered under the high crystal lights, his violet eyes filled with cold calculation. He wasn't going to let this go. Valera lifted her hand, and the noise faded. The trial has spoken. Orion's heart is pure. He has passed a test that none of you could manipulate. Zivar stepped forward, his tone sharp. But what does that prove, Your Highness? He is still a human. He has no noble blood, no connection to our empire. You cannot seriously be considering. Valera's voice cut through the air like a blade. I can consider whatever I choose. The hall fell silent. Orion raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected her to stand up for him so directly. Valera turned to face him fully. You have proven yourself in every trial. You have stood your ground against those who doubted you. But there is still one choice left to be made. She stepped forward, her elegant robes trailing behind her. You came here by accident. You could have walked away from this trial at any time, yet you stayed. Tell me, Orion, what is it you truly want? Orion blinked. That was a question he hadn't been asked before. He glanced around the hall, the suspicious nobles, the stunned suitors, and finally, Valera herself. She was regal, proud, beautiful beyond words. And yet, there was something in her eyes, something uncertain. For all her power, she had never been given a choice either. Orion exhaled. I didn't come here to steal a throne. I didn't come here to prove anything. I stayed because he hesitated, then met her gaze. Because I wanted to see where this led. And because, for some reason, I can't imagine walking away from you now. Valera's breath caught. The hall was utterly still. Valtheran's voice broke the silence. This is madness. Orion turned to him. Why? Because I don't fit into your perfect little world. Valtheran's expression twisted. Because you don't belong here. Orion gave him a small, amused smirk. And yet, here I am. The tension was thick, ready to snap. The nobles were waiting for Valera to make her decision. Would she cast Orion aside? Or would she defy tradition? She could see the path laid before her. If she rejected him, the empire would return to its old ways. The nobles would breathe easy, and her life would continue as it always had, empty, predetermined. Or she could choose something different, something uncertain, something real. Valera lifted her chin. I once declared that I would marry anyone but a human. The crowd held its breath. A slow smile crossed her lips. It appears I was wrong. Gasps filled the chamber. Orion's eyes widened slightly. But then, he laughed. So much for first impressions. Valera turned to her people. Orion has earned his place here. He has faced every challenge, every doubt, and has stood strong. If there is anyone here more worthy, let them prove it now. Silence. Not a single noble stepped forward. Not one suitor spoke. Because they knew. The decision had been made. Valtheran's jaw clenched, his rage barely contained. But he said nothing. Valera looked back at Orion. You have the freedom to choose, Orion. Do you accept your place by my side? Orion met her gaze, a small smile playing on his lips. I think we both knew the answer to that a long time ago. She offered her hand. He took it, and the galaxy would never be the same again.